A passionate Polish diver went on a deep dive in Goul du Pont to break his depth record of 337 feet. He hit the water and gracefully dived deeper as he enjoyed the cave's beautiful scenery on his quest. Suddenly, every diver's worst nightmare struck him, and he got himself into big trouble. Goul du Pont is located in Ardèche and Drôme, southwest France. It's situated within the boundaries of Bourg-Saint-Andéol and is found under a viaduct of the SNCF. The cave has a completely flooded system that is entered via a 10 to 13 foot diameter walled-off pool. The cave is part of a hydrological system that drains water from the Remeze plateau. Unforgettable diving may be found at this location with really intriguing rock formations. The water is exceptionally clear. The numerous curving passageways that occur in caves make it crucial to have a solid sense of direction. This is a location that is only accessible to technical divers due to the great depths. French explorers have reached as deep as 583 feet in this cave. In late December 2000, Vlodek, a 42-year-old caving enthusiast, was motivated by the sight of younger cave divers exploring sumps in the Polish Tatra Mountains. He resolved to learn cave diving himself and began taking steps to do so, including enrolling in a diving course and buying equipment. Despite the promise he made to his wife that he wouldn't take up cave diving, Vlodek joined a cave diving expedition in August 2001, led by a leading Polish cave diver, Victor Bolek. The expedition took place in a resurgence in Romania, where he dove to a depth of 164 feet. He quickly became passionate about the sport and sought as much training as possible. Vlodek had a strong sense of self-motivation and disliked letting minor inconveniences prevent him from achieving his objectives. He liked the adversity and difficulty because they enhanced the sweetness of the eventual victory. Vlodek rose to prominence as one of Poland's top cave divers by 2005. Since his beginnings in August 2001, he has logged a sizable number of cave diving expeditions, both domestically and internationally, and he has kept records of them in his Deep and High website. He traveled to the Picos in July 2002 as part of the OUCC Tormenta 2002 expedition, where he and Victor Bolek made an unsuccessful attempt to connect the C4 sump and 2-7. He completed nearly 30 dives in 2003, with a maximum depth on his rebreather of 337 feet. Vlodek made at least 3 dives in 2004 that were within 100 meters of the bottom. His mentor and top-tier Polish cave diver, Victor Bolek, tragically passed away in May 2004 while scuba diving in a flooded quarry, allegedly from natural causes. The research on his buccal towels had been spearheaded by Victor, and after Victor's death, Vlodek took over, planning excursions in August and September 2004 and again in January 2005. On April 4, 2005, he traveled to the charming French town of Bourg-Saint-Andéol with a small group led by another Wrocław cave diver. Given that French divers were already exploring the caves at Bourg-Saint-Andéol, this was very much on the tourist end of the spectrum. On April 5th at around 9 p.m., Vlodek dived for around 80 minutes, reaching a maximum depth of 30 feet, in what was almost certainly the Goul de la Tannerie cave. On one of his dive computers, this dive was captured. Vlodek adored any sophistication in technology. His passion for taking risks and his interest in electronics were both legendary. The Goul du Pont, which lies a short distance from the Goul de la Tannerie, was the second cave that Vlodek decided to explore. He considered this cave the perfect place to improve on his depth record of 337 feet, recorded back in 2003. On that April morning in 2005, as Vlodek got ready, the charming French town of Bourg-Saint-Andéol certainly appeared like a fantastic place to be. He would utilize his well-known Buddy Inspiration rebreather apparatus for this dive and breathe a specific gas combination called Trimix that is designed for deep diving. An alternative to the conventional Jacques Cousteau style of diving equipment is the computer-controlled technical marvel known as the Buddy Inspiration. A rebreather can, given the correct conditions, enable a diver to prolong their underwater time and overall capabilities. His rebreather had experienced a few small dampness-related issues that morning as a result of leftover water from a little dive he had completed the previous evening, but it was nothing that ought to trouble him excessively or force him to cancel the dive. The dive the night before had also demonstrated that the apparatus was in good working order, so the Goul du Pont dive was anticipated. On April 6, 2005, shortly after 9:30 a.m., Vlodek entered the sump pool of Goul du Pont and began to perform his pre-dive checks. He fastened two pre-submerged 10-liter cylinders, each weighing around 15 kilograms, to his harness. One of the cylinders was filled with a 1550 trimix, and the other was a 40% nitrox mix. If a rebreather fails underwater, the breathing regulator-equipped cylinders are an essential safety backup. The trimix cylinder was carried for emergency usage in the deeper parts of the cave, and the other containing a gas mixture for the shallower depths. Each may be utilized independently of the rebreather in an emergency. Vlodek's head dipped below the surface as he completed the long and tedious but necessary pre-dive checks on his rebreather. Around 9:55 a.m., he was prepared to leave, and he began his dive with a call-out time of 3 p.m. He was wearing a lot of cumbersome gear that wasn't made for caves, where space is usually limited. The back-mounted rebreather had a hard, yellow turtle-like shell that limited the height of the tunnel he could easily go through. The side-mounted safety cylinders also made it more difficult for him to maneuver through any confined locations. While using such a setup in open water poses no issues, doing so in smaller caverns can present issues. Fortunately, the Goul du Pont is generally roomy and appropriate for the hefty equipment he was wearing, except for a brief shingle-filled constriction near the entry at a depth of 39 feet. Vlodek had enough to do as he descended, in addition to taking in the surroundings of the cave channel. Monitoring the oxygen content of the gas he was breathing on a close monitoring basis was one of the most crucial jobs. The automated control system for the rebreather should, in principle, be able to manage the oxygen level with great precision, but computer control will always have its constraints and can experience problems. Constant attention to the readings is required. The diver must adjust the volume of gas in the rebreather to balance the pressure of the breathing gas with the pressure of the surrounding water for each meter gained or lost in depth during the ascent. Breathing would soon become impossible without this easy task, which was a manual operation on Vlodek's equipment. Vlodek arrived at a rather horizontal passageway that immediately opens out after the shingle constriction. The water was, as expected, unusually clear that day, and his helmet-mounted lights would have easily cut through the night to give him a clear view of the distant, gloomy horizon. Just 246 feet from the entrance, the cave tunnel abruptly switches directions and plunges headfirst into the depths at a depth of 59 feet. The cave's main struggle starts at this point. For those who have never dived before, following the passage down required more than just having Vlodek turn his body vertically while aiming his head downward. A diver must keep their body somewhat horizontal in the water, especially when utilizing the buddy inspiration rebreather. The standard method for controlling a diver's descent and ascent is to adjust buoyancy, decrease buoyancy to descend, and increase buoyancy to rise. To descend, the diver deflates a buoyancy control device that is attached to him or her. Contradictory, filling the BCD with air will make it more buoyant and ascend the diver. The only issue is that as the diver descends, the water pressure gradually compresses the remaining air in the BCD, resulting in an equally gradual loss of buoyancy. If nothing else is done, this will cause the diver to descend at an ever-increasing rate until he or she hits the bottom. As depth increases, the diver must regularly infuse fresh air into the BCD to maintain a controlled rate of descent. The diver must pump more air into the BCD to stop the decline and achieve neutral buoyancy, but not very much, or he will start going up. Vlodek let out a small amount of air from his BCD to start the descent. Then he started to drift softly downhill. A sequence of vertical steps is present in the traditional phreatic-shaped tunnel throughout the following 197 feet of depth. Vlodek likely started to encounter some unanticipated issues at some point during this section of the fall. The first was that, when he dropped below 164 feet, the effects of nitrogen narcosis presumably seemed to be harsher than he had anticipated. It is more likely that Vlodek would not have been deterred by what he may have considered simply a terrible day, because he didn't allow minor setbacks to stand in the way of a significant goal. The vertical staircase comes to an end, and a horizontal gallery is reached at a depth of 259 feet. He pushed on along the gallery to the top of the spectacular 98-foot pitch, despite the likelihood that he was suffering from nitrogen narcosis at this point and that breathing was incredibly challenging. His dive had turned extremely dangerous at this point. Although he was negatively affected by narcosis, which impaired his ability to analyze the situation and make critical decisions, Vlodek was determined to proceed. He was strongly self-motivated, relished adversity and challenges, and made a decision to press on with a dive that would beat his depth record. Vlodek proceeded along a horizontal gallery and used his buoyancy control device to maintain neutral buoyancy. To descend the pitch, he must vent off a small amount of air from the BCD to achieve negative buoyancy. As he descended, the effects of narcosis increased, affecting his ability to operate equipment and perceive the situation he was in. He must also regulate the gas pressure in his rebreather and control his rate of descent. The density of the gas also increases, making it harder to breathe and making the descent increasingly difficult. Instead of slowly drifting down the pitch in a relaxed and leisurely manner, he found he was having to work progressively harder simply to breathe. Whether Vlodek's rebreather was capable of handling exhaled carbon dioxide at extreme depths is currently in question, and he was likely breathing part of it back in. All things considered, with every meter he descended, his predicament grew more perilous. According to the minimal information given, what happened next can only be speculated. A possible explanation is that his capacity to control his buoyancy, and presumably the gas pressure within his rebreather, just became too difficult for him to manage in his more narcotic state at a depth of between 295 to 328 feet. He came to rest on a ledge at a depth of 344 feet as he fell downward out of control. He was probably only partially awake at this point, but the impact of hitting the ledge or his temporary inability to breathe may have briefly awakened him. He still had one trick left in his bag. He was able to switch from the main rebreather circuit and breathe straight from one of the device's smaller onboard cylinders, thanks to modifications to the rebreather. According to the logic, even if the rebreather had malfunctioned in any way, the onboard cylinder shouldn't have been impacted. The little cylinder had only theoretically enough gas to keep him breathing for 60 to 90 seconds, but that should be enough time for him to switch from the rebreather to the external emergency cylinder. Fortunately, after flipping the switch, he discovered that he could breathe again. Unfortunately, there wasn't much more he could do at this point. He lay there unable to move his attached emergency cylinder, which remained unattended, for reasons both physical and mental. This move was relatively easy, but necessary. The mouthpiece fell out of his mouth, and he drowned less than a minute after switching to the onboard cylinder. At 3 p.m., he had still not shown up as he had planned, so the surface party chose to see what could be done on their own. They made 2 dives to a maximum depth of 230 feet, but weren't able to find Vlodek. The rescue services were notified for what was, by this point, certain to be a body retrieval, because all reasonable hope had been lost. The following day, the French rescue team discovered Vlodek's body with his mouthpiece out of his mouth at a depth of 344 feet, towards the bottom of the 98-foot pitch, and started the gruesome process of extraction. The authorities started an investigation into what happened after his unfortunate death that occurred on French soil. The case's presiding examiner then requested an expert report from a knowledgeable French diver, which was delivered in November 2005. According to the analysis report, Vlodek drowned after the mouthpiece came out of his mouth. The diluent gas used in the dives was improperly prepared, which was the accident's primary cause. The report stated, During the descent, the diver had to breathe 1550 trimix from the beginning of the dive, and to finish in the deep exploration on 1070 trimix. Indeed, this mixture, being the richest in helium, 70%, is only 20% nitrogen and should eliminate the problems of narcosis. Yet if he follows this procedure when at a depth of around 262 to 296 feet, he injects air instead of a 1550 trimix mixture. The narcotic effect of the nitrogen narcosis is immediate. This can be explained by the idea that Vlodek should have utilized the gas as a diluent by connecting the 1550 trimix cylinder to an inflation point on his rebreather's counterlung. Instead, he switched from utilizing the external cylinder to using the internal diluent of the rebreather at a depth of about 262 to 296 feet. The narcotic effect of the new diluent on him was instant after he administered what he believed to be a 1070 trimix. Many have generally assumed that a fatal ending would have been caused by an unsuitable diluent and an unapproved CO2 absorbent, though. They don't appear to be able to comprehend how an experienced diver like Vlodek would have ended up in a deep cave using an air diluent. Could it be that Vlodek did not switch cylinders before diving the following day, but instead used the air diluent in the Goul de la Tannerie, where he had previously dived? For this to have happened, Vlodek would have needed to either have forgotten to swap the cylinders the following morning or thought the first day's dive was on trimix. Nevertheless, the tragic event led to the loss of another passionate member of the diving community. We would like to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed watching, take a dive on the like and subscribe buttons and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we come back with another exciting cave diving story.